The End of Employment, Part 4 by John Michael Greer. The cost per worker of equipping a workplace, in turn, also has a political dimension, a point that Schumacher did not neglect, though nearly all other economists pretend that it doesn't exist. The more costly it is to equip a workplace, the more certain it is that the workers won't be able to set themselves up in business, and the more control the very rich will have over economic production and the supply of jobs. As Joseph Tainer pointed out in The Collapse of Complex Societies, social complexity correlates precisely with social hierarchy. One of the functions of the complexity in the workplace, as elsewhere, is thus to maintain existing social pecking orders. Schumacher's arguments, though, focused on the third world nations of his own time, which had very little manufacturing capacity at all. Most of them, remember, had been colonies of European empires. Assigned the role of producing raw materials and buying finished products from the imperial center as part of the wealth pump that drove them to grinding poverty while keeping their imperial overlords rich. He focused on advising client nations on how to build their own economies and extract themselves from the political grip of their former overlords, who were usually all too eager to import high-tech factories, which their upper classes inevitably controlled. The situation is considerably more challenging when your economy is geared to immense surpluses of concentrated energy, and the supply of energy begins to run short. And of course, that's the situation we're in today. Even if it were just a matter of replacing factory equipment, that would be a huge challenge because all those expensive machines, not to mention the infrastructure that manufactures them, maintains them, supplies them, and integrates their products into their wider economy, count as sunk costs subject to what social psychologists call the Concord fallacy. The conviction that it's less wasteful to keep on throwing money into a failing project than to cut your losses and to do something else. The real problem is that it's not just factory equipment. The entire economy has been structured from the ground up to use colossal amounts of highly concentrated energy. And everything that's been invested in that economy since the beginning of the modern era thus counts as sunk cost to one degree or another. What makes this even more challenging is that very few people in the modern industrial world actually produce goods and services for consumers, much less for themselves, by applying energy to raw materials. The vast majority of today's employees, and in particular all those who have wealth and influence that come with high status, don't do this. Executive brokers, bankers, consultants, analysts, salespeople, well, I could go on for pages. The whole range of what used to be called white-collar jobs exists to support the production of goods and services by the working Joes and Janes managing all the energy-intensive machinery down there on the shop floor. So does the entire vast maze of the financial industry, and so do the legions of government bureaucrats, local, state, and federal, who manage, regulate, or oversee one or another aspect of economic activity. All these people are understandably just as interested in keeping their jobs as the working Joes and Janes down there on the shop floor. And yet the energy surpluses that make it economically viable to perch such an immensely complex infrastructure on top of the production of goods and services for consumers are going away. The result is a frantic struggle on everyone's part to make sure that the other guy loses his job first. It's a struggle that all of them will ultimately lose as the energy surplus needed to support it dwindles away. So will the entire system that's perched on that high but precarious support. And so, as long as that system remains in place, getting hired by an employer, paid a regular wage or salary, and given work in a workplace to produce goods and services that the employer then sells to someone else, is going to become increasingly rare and increasingly unrewarding. The transformation is already well underway. Nobody I know personally who works for an employer in the sense I've just outlined is prospering in today's American economy. Most of the people I know who are employees in the usual sense of the word are having their benefits slashed, their working conditions worsened, their hours cut, and their pay reduced by one maneuver or another. The threat of being laid off is constantly hovering over their heads. The few exceptions are treading water and hoping to escape the same fate. None of this is accidental, and none of it is merely the result of greed on the part of the very rich. Although, admittedly, the culture of executive kleptocracy at the upper end of the American social pyramid is making things a great deal worse than they might otherwise be. The people I know who are prospering right now are those who provide goods and services for their own use and provide goods and services directly to other people without having an employer to provide them with work, a workplace, and a regular wage or salary. Some of these people have to stay under the radar screen of the current legal and regulatory system, since the people who work in that system are trying to preserve their own jobs by making life difficult by those who try to do without their services. Others could do things more openly. All of them have sidestepped as many as possible of the infrastructure services that are supposed to be a part of an employee's working life. For example, they aren't getting trained at universities, since the U.S. academic industry these days is just another predatory business sector trying to keep itself afloat by running others into the ground, and they aren't going to banks for working capital for much the same reason. They're using their own labor, their own wits, and their own personal connections with potential customers to find a niche in which they can earn the money or barter for the goods they need or want. I'd like to suggest that this is the wave of the future, not least because this is how economic life normally operates in non industrial societies, where the vast majority of people in the workforce are directly engaged in the production of goods and services for themselves and their own customers. The surplus that supports all those people in management, finance, and so on is a luxury that non industrial societies don't have. In the most pragmatic of economic senses, collapsing now and avoiding the rush involves getting out of a dying model of economics before it drags you down and finding your footing in the emerging informal economy, while there's still time to get past the worst of the learning curve. Playing by the rules of a dying economy, that is not a strategy with a high success rate or a long shelf life. Those of my readers who are still employed in the usual sense of the term may choose to hold on to that increasingly rare status, but it's not wise for them to assume that such arrangements will last indefinitely. Using the available money and other resources to get training, tools, and skills for some other way of getting by would probably be a wise strategy. Those are my readers who have already fallen through the widening cracks of the unemployment economy will have a harder row to hoe in many cases. For them, the crucial requirement is getting access to food, shelter, and other necessities while figuring out what to do next and getting through any learning curve that may be required. All these challenges still, like the broader challenge of coping with the decline and fall of civilization, they are challenges that countless other people have met in other places and times. Those who are willing to set aside currently popular fantasies of entitlement and the fashionable pleasures of despair will likely be in a position to do the same thing this time around too. This has been the end of Employment, Part 4 by John Michael Greer.